On a Sunday night in August 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and, in about 15 minutes, ended the system that had run the world's money since the Second World War. He bumped a rerun of Bonanza to do it. Most Americans watching were mildly annoyed about the Western, nodded along to a few lines about protecting the dollar. They had no idea that the money in their wallets had just quietly changed into something it had never been before. Here is what Nixon actually did that night. Since 1944, the American promise to the world had been simple and almost physical. A dollar was a claim on gold. Any foreign government holding dollars could walk up to the United States, hand them over, and walk away with real gold at a fixed price of $35 an ounce. That promise was the anchor the whole planet's money was tied to, and in 15 minutes, Nixon cut the rope. To understand why that mattered, you have to go back to a hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire. July 1944. The war was still raging, but the Allies could see the end coming, and they were already worried about the peace. 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel, a sprawling resort in the town of Bretton Woods, to answer one question. After the war, how do you stop the world's money from tearing itself apart, again the way it had in the 1930s? They had all lived through what happens when there is no answer, and it had been a nightmare. In the 1930s, as the Great Depression spread, country after country tried to save itself by cheapening its own money and slamming the door on foreign goods. Everyone devalued. Everyone built walls. World trade collapsed by more than half. And the wreckage helped feed the dictators who started the war these men were now finishing. They were determined never to live through that again. They wanted money that was stable and boring. Currencies locked to one another, so trade could flow without every nation quietly cheating. Gold and the dollar were going to be the thing that held it all still. The fight over how to build that came down to two men. On the British side, John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist alive, who wanted a brand new world currency run by a global bank. On the American side, a Treasury official named Harry Dexter White, who had a different plan, one that quietly put the dollar at the center of everything. Britain was broke and dependent on American money to keep fighting the war. So Britain lost. The system that came out of Bretton Woods was basically White's, and it built the post-war world around the United States. The deal worked like this. Every other currency, the pound, the franc, the mark, the yen, was pegged to the dollar at a fixed rate, and the dollar alone was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. So the dollar became the middleman for the entire world. If you trusted that America would always swap your dollars for gold, then holding dollars was as good as holding gold, and a lot more convenient. The conference also created two institutions to police the whole thing: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. They still run today. There was just one catch, and it took years to show up. The system only really switched on in 1958, when European countries grew confident enough to let their currencies be freely traded. And almost as soon as it was fully working, an economist named Robert Triffin spotted the trap buried inside it. The trap goes like this: for world trade to grow, everybody needed dollars to do business. The only way for the world to get dollars was for America to send them out, by buying more from abroad than is sold, by stationing armies overseas, by lending and spending around the globe. So America had to keep pumping dollars into the world. But every dollar that piled up in a foreign vault was another claim on that fixed pile of American gold. The more the world used the dollar, the more dollars existed, and the harder it became to believe that every single one could really be swapped for gold. The system needed America to flood the world with dollars, and that very flood is what would eventually sink it. By 1961, the math crossed a dangerous line. The dollars sitting in foreign hands had grown larger than all the gold in American vaults. On paper, the promise was now impossible to keep. If everyone showed up at once asking for gold, there wasn't nearly enough. It was a bank run waiting to happen, and the bankers of the world could all see it sitting there. So they tried to prop it up. In late 1961, 8 countries, the United States, Britain, Switzerland, and 5 others, quietly pooled their gold together to defend that $35 price. When speculators pushed the price of gold up, this pool would sell gold to push it back down. It was a finger in the dam, and it held for about 7 years. Then, in March 1968, it broke. The pool was hemorrhaging gold faster than it could stand, and the countries gave up. From then on, there were really two prices of gold, the official one and the real one, and everybody knew the official promise was living on borrowed time. France, in particular, had stopped pretending. Paris resented that America could simply print the world's money and use it to buy up French companies and fund foreign wars, while everyone else had to actually earn dollars to get by. The French finance minister had a phrase for it. He called the dollar's special status America's exorbitant privilege, and France began doing the obvious thing, turning its dollars back into American gold while the window was still open. Then came the spending. Through the 1960s, America was paying for two enormous things at once: a war in Vietnam that kept getting bigger and more expensive, and an ambitious set of programs at home, the Great Society, meant to fight poverty. Washington didn't want to raise taxes to cover both, so it papered over the gap with dollars. Inflation crept in. More and more dollars sloshed out into the world, and the gap between the promise and the gold grew into a chasm. By the summer of 1971, the numbers were brutal. Foreigners were holding something like $80 billion. The American gold stockpile behind that promise was worth only around $10 billion. Everyone could do the division. There was no honest way America kept its word, and the world had finally stopped believing it would. The run was starting for real now. Governments and banks quietly lining up to grab gold before the music stopped. Britain reportedly asked to convert billions of dollars in a single go. The dam was about to burst, and Washington knew it. So Nixon disappeared. On Friday, the 13th of August, 1971, he and 15 of his top advisors slipped away to Camp David, the presidential retreat in the mountains of Maryland, and sealed themselves off for the weekend. In the room were the men who ran American money, including the Treasury Secretary, John Connally, a tall, blonde Texan, and a younger official named Paul Volcker, who would go on to run the Federal Reserve. For 2 days they argued, with no aides leaking and no press watching, over how to stop the bleeding without setting off a panic. Some wanted to defend the old promise. Connally wanted to blow it up and put America first. Connally won. The plan they came out with was radical. On Sunday evening, August 15th, Nixon told the country he was closing the gold window. Foreign governments could no longer trade their dollars for American gold. The $35 promise, the anchor of the entire post-war system, was simply switched off. He slapped a 10% tax on imports to force other countries to the table, and he froze wages and prices for 90 days to fight inflation. The markets, strangely, loved it. Stocks jumped the next morning. Other governments were furious, and they had nowhere to go. When America's trading partners complained that the falling dollar was wrecking their economies, Connally reportedly told a room of European finance ministers exactly where they stood. The dollar, he said, is our currency, but it is your problem. It was rude, and it was completely true. The world's money was American, and so the world's money was now whatever America decided it would be. For a moment, everyone pretended it could be patched. In December 1971, the major economies met at the Smithsonian in Washington and agreed to a fix, nudging the dollar down a little and setting new fixed rates. Nixon called it the most important monetary agreement in the history of the world. It lasted less than 15 months. The pressure never stopped. In early 1973, the dam gave way for good. One by one, the major currencies were cut loose to simply float, their values set day to day by traders, rather than by any promise about gold. By that spring, the system born at Bretton Woods was finished. And that, quietly, is the world we still live in. Since 1973, no major currency has been backed by gold or by anything you can hold. The money in your pocket is worth something for one reason only, because everyone agrees it is. We call it fiat money, money by decree, money built entirely on trust. It floats. It can be printed in a crisis. And the whole machinery of modern finance, the trading of currencies, the global flood of dollars, grew up in the space Nixon opened that weekend. The dollar itself, though, never lost its throne. Just 2 years later, as oil prices exploded, the world's oil came to be priced and paid for in dollars, which meant every country still needed them to fill its tanks. The promise of gold was dead, but the habit of the dollar lived on. America had stumbled onto something strange and powerful. It could be the world's banker without keeping the gold in the vault. It's money backed now by oil, by markets, and by the plain fact that there was nothing else big enough to take its place. Look hard at how this actually happened. The monetary order that governs all of our lives wasn't redesigned by a careful committee over years of study. It was improvised by 16 exhausted men in a mountain cabin over a single weekend to stop a run they could no longer survive. Bretton Woods was built to give the world something solid to stand on. What replaced it was faith, and we have been standing on that faith, whether we noticed or not, ever since.